Today we're going to take a look at what exactly Blackmagic RAW is and some new developments in Premiere and Resolve. Now, just to understand in simple terms exactly what RAW is, when you take a photo and it's not RAW, the camera basically decides on how it's going to produce the photo for you, obviously depending on which setting you choose. But with RAW, you're getting a lot more data to work with. Now, in both cases, you can make adjustments. You can add more saturation and contrast and lowering the highlights, for example. But if you're not shooting RAW, if you were to lessen the highlights, for example, you're not going to be able to recover whatever was there if you're not shooting RAW. And this concept with photos pretty much carries directly over into RAW when you shoot video. One of the nice features of Blackmagic RAW is how well it plays back. With non-RAW video footage, your program has to take apart, basically decode the footage, and then re-encode it, all while trying to play it back, which is why you may have noticed with certain type of footage, when you play it back, it will stop and then start up again, because your system is trying to do all that processing in real time. But with Blackmagic RAW, part of that process is done in camera, so this way your computer doesn't have to do as much work. And as you see, as I'm scrubbing through these files, there's no stuttering, there's no stops and starts, and everything just moves smoothly. Another way of shooting RAW footage was using DNG files, which are basically individual frames of whatever footage you're looking at. It pretty much has the same impact and you'll have as much flexibility to do things after the fact, but it was a little cumbersome having to organize all those files and then import them into your editor. Now here I have some footage that isn't RAW. It's H.264, which is pretty much compressed. It's a 4K file. And again, we can still make adjustments, of course. We just won't have as much flexibility. But if you notice when we try to play it back, I'll move the playhead around. And even though I've already moved it, the video won't catch up until it's done doing the decoding and then re-encoding in real time. Another great thing about Blackmagic RAW is that you have options for compression. And the logic here being, if you don't compress something, it's going to be very large. Like we said before, you have a lot of data that you can recover. And although this is great, and the playback performance is fantastic, you are still recording all that data. So of course, these are going to be large files. So you have the option to do a little bit of compression. And by doing so, you'll lessen the file size. And early reports on Blackmagic RAW from those that have actually tested this out say even with the 12:1 compression, where it's making the file really small, that the effect on the final output isn't that noticeable. And this is just a testament to how good the compression is with the Blackmagic RAW. There is also a compression option with the constant quality option. So the difference between what we just discussed and with the constant quality is that when you compress something, obviously something has to be sacrificed. I know that I just mentioned that it's not that noticeable, but still something has to be sacrificed. So if you want the best quality, you'll choose Q0, and this will record everything. The good thing about this is if there's not that much in your scene, it won't use that much data. But the way they explain it is that there's some headroom. So in other words, if there's a lot of activity and a lot that needs to be recorded, they'll up the data in camera so that this way you'll be able to record even more without any loss in quality. Once again, as the saying goes, there's no free lunch, so of course this ends up being larger files. So you do have the compression options with Q5, where you're still getting that constant quality, but the file sizes are a little bit smaller. Now, as we discussed with the photos, you can do the same thing with video. You can go in there and make adjustments to the exposure, adjustments to the saturation, contrast, all things, of course, that you can do after the fact with footage that isn't RAW, but once again, you won't have that flexibility. You can see if I go into the Camera RAW tab, now I can choose decode using clip, and then we have all sorts of options that we can adjust now. I can, of course, go down to the ISO, and if I raise the number, just like within the camera, I can actually make the footage brighter. And obviously, this is independent of any of the adjustments we can make with the exposure using something like curves. So overall, I'm pretty impressed with Blackmagic RAW. You're getting a lot of the data. It's 12-bit data, which is great. There's more than that. There's 14-bit out there, obviously. But 12-bit is a lot of data, and you have that flexibility to make your adjustments, and the playback is smooth. The other thing I wanted to address in this video is that there's been a lot of camera releases, but now the editing programs are starting to get closer in their functionality. And as always, competition is a great thing, so we start to see a lot more things implemented. For example, now Adobe actually has more curves. For the longest time, they didn't have what DaVinci had as far as hue versus hue and luma versus saturation. If you want to see a video that I did on that to understand what these are, at least within Resolve, I'll link to that in the card and in the description below. But alternatively, now DaVinci Resolve has included auto ducking in its Fairlight tab when working with audio. I'm going to go into this more in the next video that I upload, but basically if you have music and someone speaking and there's gaps in the speech, the program will determine when the dialogue comes in and it will automatically lower the music for you.